after the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the Apostle Mark came to Egypt, right? And he preached the gospel, and his disciples preached the gospel. So because of the result of the impact of the preaching of the gospel by the Apostle Mark and others who brought the gospel to Egypt, by the 200s, after the birth of Christ, most Egyptians were followers of Jesus Christ. Wow, we're here. It's so amazing. I've been looking forward to coming for so long. For years, this thing has been sort of partially opened or partially built and not quite ready for opening. I've been waiting and waiting, and now the day has come that I can finally walk inside, and I want to take you around this amazing place. I brought some American evangelicals. I brought a few Israeli evangelical followers of Jesus. Let's find out how the Egyptian government has decided to tell its story. Well, the first thing you have to see when you come to this museum is the massive statue of Ramses II. That is probably the most famous pharaoh in the history of Egypt, at least in terms of what the world knows about Egyptian history, right? Ramses II was immortalized in the famous Ten Commandments movie, right, with Charlton Heston, because because Hollywood decided that Ramses II was the guy, was the pharaoh that said to Moses, I'm not going to let your people go, right? And then, of course, in Prince of Egypt, Ramses II is the stepbrother, as it were, of Moses in the animated version. Ramses II was probably not the actual pharaoh that had the standoff with Moses, but it is interesting that Ramses II, this massive, beautiful, incredibly preserved statue, is the centerpiece when you first enter the Grand Egyptian Museum. In 1990 or thereabouts, there began to be a discussion in Egypt. Hey, I think we need a new museum. The old museum, the historic museum, the one that I've been to many, many times over the last 20 years, that museum based right on Tahrir Square, right in the heart of Cairo, is old. And it doesn't have enough space for all of Egypt's enormous number of artifacts. And it's an older concept of running a museum. And it feels like an old library that just has a bunch of stuff. Yeah, it's marked and everything, but it's not using the most modern, high-tech designs for museums. And that's why around 1990, early 90s, there began to be a discussion, hey, I think we need a new museum. What should that look like? What's interesting is that more than 1,500 international and Egyptian architectural firms were allowed to submit designs, and over 2,000 designs were submitted. So some firms submitted more than one. That was in the early 2000s as the Egyptian government began to say, okay, we've thought about it. Yes, we should do this. What would that look like? What's interesting is that the winner was a little architectural firm, one that had, of only 4 architects, one that had been started in New York. They actually moved to Dublin, and they submitted a design that really just wowed the Egyptian leadership, and they decided to award this enormous contract, this historic contract, to this little firm. And this is the building now. This billion-dollar museum is the culmination of decades worth of thinking, planning, designing, and looking at how can the Egyptian government, the Grand Egyptian Museum, how can it portray the rich history, the artifacts, the story, the narrative of 4,000 years of Egyptian history, right? The United States, when the Smithsonian museums were created, the American History Museum was trying to cover less than 300 years worth of history. And of course it did it in this, a beautiful way. But how would the Egyptian government take all the artifacts and not just try to stuff everything in your face and say, okay, here it all is, right? That's sort of the feeling that you got in the old museum. But then how could they take people on a physical journey, an emotional, sensory journey into Egyptian history and portray really 3 different major areas? The history, of course, and the culture of Egypt over the years, the leaders of the country, and then the beliefs of the country. One of the most fascinating things that we learned from our guide that as we came through our sort of VIP tour was that if you think of the early centuries of Egypt after the birth, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ, the Apostle Mark came to Egypt, right? And he preached the gospel and his disciples preached the gospel. So because of the result of the impact of the preaching of the gospel by the Apostle Mark and others who brought the gospel to Egypt, by the 200s after the birth of Christ, most Egyptians were followers of Jesus Christ. And this is what became the Coptic Orthodox Egyptian Church, of which there are more than 15 million Coptic Egyptian Christians today. Now, obviously, with the rise of Islam, things changed, right? The rise of Islam in the 7th century, as the Arabs moved from the Arabian Peninsula, from Mecca and Medina, and spread all over the Middle East and North Africa and Central Asia, Egypt became a center of being conquered by the forces of Muhammad, and eventually most Egyptians became Muslims. And so how this museum sort of navigates that history, but also pre-Christian, pre-Islamic history that goes back to the times of the pharaohs, right? All of that is so beautifully done here. I have to say, I am in love with this museum, but I want to encourage you to be thinking, wow, as things get a little safer and a little calmer, there's not only the pyramids to see, right, and a Nile cruise to go on, and all the different things that are so powerful about visiting Egypt, but coming to this museum is one of the highlights. It will be one of the highlights of your trip. It's certainly been the highlight of this trip for me.
Did you know that you can diversify your investments while supporting Israel? Today's sponsor, Wise Money Israel, manages Israeli stock and bond accounts for people from 30 different nations. As Israelis battle to hold on to our land, you can support us by backing successful companies that power our economy and sustain the Jewish people. Wise Money Israel's professionals wisely invest your funds in the local market. Look, Israel's economy is one of the most resilient and innovative in the world. And God promised that those who bless Israel will also be blessed. So help restore Israel to the blessings that God promised her. Align your finances with your faith. Diversify your investments and partner with Israeli believers who share your values. Visit wisemoneyisrael.com/Joel to learn more and to sign up for a free consultation today.
So interesting to be going through this museum and seeing all these different sections. Now, again, some of the sections aren't open to us yet because the grand opening of this thing hasn't happened. But as we go, one of the things that happens is you start to see the ancient leaders of the country, right, depicted in these statues of the ancient pharaohs, the ancient kings of Egypt. And as you go up, we learn more about the society, more about the leaders, more about the beliefs of the Egyptian people, and it's sort of taking you up to eternity. Further up, we're going to find mummies. We're going to find the burial practices of the Egyptians who believed in an afterlife, and they believed that the treasures that were put in the tombs of the pharaohs would be part of their treasures in eternity. And so it's a very interesting design in which you meet these leaders, as it were, in these beautiful ancient, I mean, these are really old statues of the ancient pharaohs. And as you go up, either by walking or on this escalator, you learn more about the future and the eternity that is believed in. They believe in eternity. Most Egyptians, however, don't believe in Jesus Christ. Now, one thing you're not going to see here at the Grand Egyptian Museum is the history of the Hebrew people when they were enslaved in Egypt for more than 400 years, right? That is a story that isn't going to get told here. In fact, it's not even written in the archives of Egyptian hieroglyphics, right? So far, there simply is no Egyptian written evidence, description of the slavery of the Israelite Hebrew people, or the Exodus and the drama of what we read about in the scriptures in the book of Exodus, right? We just don't have records of this. Why wouldn't we? Well, because which Egyptian leader is going to write about the devastation by the God of Israel of the Egyptian society and its leadership and the 10 plagues and so forth? So it's very much understandable that nobody wanted to write that history. Now, is it possible that it will be found someday? It is possible, and that would be fascinating. But we do have an ancient, dramatic, written account of what happened. That's the Bible, right? Exodus is the account. It's the account God wants us to know. It doesn't tell us every detail, but it tells us a lot. But what's interesting, and I don't want you to think that, oh, I'm going to come here and as I learn about the 4,000 years of history, wow, the 400-year plus peace of the Israelites being under slavery under a time where the Pharaoh didn't remember Joseph, didn't know Joseph. That is not something that you're going to see here. I will say that not in this museum yet, but in the original Egyptian museum that's in Tahrir Square, there is actually a whole ancient plaque that they found that lists the military exploits of a future Egyptian leader, well after Moses and the Israelites left. But it's of a leader, an Egyptian leader, long after the time of Moses and the Exodus, but that is conquering and having military exploits against many countries in the region. And one of those countries mentioned is Israel. It's very interesting because it's the only artifact so far that's known and even highlighted in the original Egyptian museum that focuses on an ancient Egyptian evidence that Israel really did exist in the ancient world and that Egypt was acknowledging it. But it's after the Exodus, and it's a time where Egypt was defeating Israel, which of course we read about in the prophecies and in the histories of Jeremiah and others.
Egypt plays a huge prominent prophetic role in the Bible. And that's one of the things that intrigues me so much about it. I'm going to do a program not long from now on Isaiah 19. This is the famous Bible prophecy in which God talks about great trauma and darkness and even judgment that's coming to the people and nation of Egypt in the last days. But Isaiah 19 very famously, dramatically, powerfully, beautifully also prophesies that God's going to show his mercy to the people of Egypt. God says, I'm going to send Egypt a savior. I'm going to send Egypt a champion. Well, who's that going to be? Well, of course, it's going to be Jesus Christ, the Lord of Lords, the King of Kings. And that's really amazing. God says, I'm going to strike Egypt, but I'm going to also heal Egypt. I'm going to send Egypt a savior. I'm going to draw the people of Egypt to myself, he says. And in fact, he calls Egypt my people at the end of Isaiah 19. That is a prophecy worth studying closely, and we're going to do that. But one of the things I want to do as we close this program tonight is just talk about God's heart for the people of Egypt. I mentioned at the top of the show, right, how many, how much Egypt is mentioned in the Bible. Almost no other country in the world is mentioned as often in the Bible, both Old Testament and New, as Egypt, besides Israel, right? And Egypt plays this really critical central role in so much of the biblical story. Obviously, the whole book of Exodus is the nation of Israel being brought out of Egypt. But so much of Genesis is about how the nation of Israel, a small family, Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, how they got to Egypt in the first place, how Joseph emerged from prison to become the prime minister of Egypt. And Joseph, in many ways, serves as a type of Jesus Christ, of the Messiah to come. Joseph, who was attacked and ridiculed and scorned and mocked and rejected by his brothers, the brothers of the tribes that became the nation of Israel, right? Joseph, who is falsely accused by the Gentile leaders of a big empire. Joseph, who is miraculously set free from
his imprisonment, from his jail cell, as it were, from condemnation, and rises to save not only the people of Egypt, but the nation of Israel and much of the Gentile world, because Joseph rises to prominence and has God's wisdom to save and to feed the starving world, a world without God, a world without hope, a world facing judgment. Joseph, in so many ways, is a type. He's a model for the Messiah to come. Jesus, who was rejected, scorned, ridiculed by his Jewish brothers and sisters here in the land of Israel, right? Jesus, who was condemned by not the Egyptian government, but by the Roman Empire. Jesus, who was condemned to darkness and death, but then emerges and saves us, and not just Israel, but saves any Gentile that will place his faith in Jesus, because Jesus is the light of the world. He's the bread of the world. He's the hope of the world. He's the salvation of the world. And so there's a lot of very interesting parallels between the life of Joseph and the life of Jesus. Obviously, Joseph wasn't God, but Joseph is never described as being sinful. Now, he was a sinner. He's a normal person, but he's always praised as being a righteous man. And again, that's part of being a model for the coming Messiah, the coming Christ. The reason I'm talking about that is because every time I go to Egypt, I love studying the scriptures about God's heart for the people of Egypt. And yes, it's true that Egypt over the centuries has at times been very cruel to Israel and the Jewish people. Obviously, it was Egypt that attacked the newly declared independent state of Israel on May 14th, 1948. They started attacking literally that day and the next. And Egypt led the Arab fight to crush and abort Israel almost in its mother's womb, certainly in its cradle, in the early days of 1948. It was Egypt that attacked again or was preparing to wipe Israel off the map, to throw the Jews into the sea in 1967, which led to the Six-Day War and a miraculous victory for the nation of Israel. Egypt attacked again and led the attack with the Syrians against Israel on Yom Kippur, the highest holy day of the Jewish calendar, doing so on October 6th, 1973, in a sneak attack that Israel should have seen coming, but didn't see coming. And yet, a few years later, Egypt became the first country in the Arab world ever to make peace with the state of Israel, right? President Anwar Sadat, who had led Egyptian forces against Israel in that sneak attack on Yom Kippur 73. Now, in 1977, he makes this surprise visit to Jerusalem, goes and speaks and gives a major address at the Knesset, and begins to negotiate with then Israeli Prime Minister Menachem Begin what became, over time, with President Carter's help at Camp David, what became known as the Camp David Accords, the first Arab-Israeli peace treaty ever. It's really an extraordinary story. And of course, my relationship that I've built over the years with Egyptian President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, a devout Muslim, spending time with a Jewish evangelical Israeli, asking me to bring the first ever evangelical delegation to meet with the leadership of Egypt, of him and his most senior people. A really fascinating time. And now Egypt plays a crucial, critical role in trying to bring peace to Gaza and bring all the hostages out and returned to Israel. I just find Egypt fascinating. Every time I go, I love it. It's got a lot of problems. It's got a lot of poverty. And I'm not saying I agree with every decision that the current president or government is making. I'm not saying any of that, but I'm just saying Egypt intrigues me. And God says time and time again in the Bible how much he loves the people of Egypt, especially and most dramatically in Isaiah 19. So I want to encourage you. Start praying about not just coming to Israel when the war is over and things open up. Well, I'll tell you, once we can put together a Rosenberg Report, All Israel News, Joshua Fund Tour, that will be amazing. Maybe we'll even do a conference. But also be praying about, when might God give you an opportunity to go to Egypt, even for a few days, maybe on the way to Israel or on the way back from Israel back home. Go to Cairo, go to see those pyramids, and go
to Egypt's billion-dollar museum.